to be hosting a conversation with one of my very favorite journalists, and I think one of the most important public intellectuals on the scene today, writing about race, inequality, and schooling in the United States, Nikole Hannah-Jones. And we're going to dispense with the long introductions today and just say you can read about us in the program. But I do want to give a special congratulations to Nikole, and something that's not in the program is she was, in August 5th, 2015, chosen as the National Association of Black Journalists Journalist of the Year, which is a very big deal. So brava to Nikole. And I'm just going to ask Nikole a series of questions. This is supposed to be simulating my living room here. My ceilings aren't as high in my little condo, but and it's going to be interspersed with clips from Nikole's work, and then I hope that we'll have time to invite all of you into the conversation, and you can ask questions from Nikole. So many of you, I think, probably heard the This American Life segments. Nikole did one of those, did an important piece on a district outside of St. Louis that we're going to hear about today. And in the beginning of that interview with Ira Glass, the host, one of the things you said was, I know from my own life, and you were referring to the challenges and also the rewards of school integration, and I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit of that with us.
Yes, so I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, and if you heard the piece, I'll just dispense with the question up front. There are black people in Iowa. My family came up through the Great Migration like millions of other black families, and if you've read Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, you know the patterns were based on the rail lines, and so our rail line went from Mississippi up through Iowa to Chicago, and somehow we got lost and didn't make it all the way to the big city. But there were enough of us in the town that there was still a great deal of housing segregation. Almost the entire black community lived on the east side of the river, and the more white, affluent parts of the town was the white side. And starting in kindergarten and in first grade, I attended segregated, almost entirely black elementary schools. And starting in second grade, my sister and I were bused to the richest and whitest school in our district. So we rode the bus about 2 hours a day, an hour there and an hour back every day. And at the time, I didn't know it. I actually didn't figure out probably until about 10 years ago that I was part of a desegregation program, because as you know, as kids, you do what your parents say. You get on the bus and you go where you're supposed to go, and you don't give a lot of thought to why. I did know that suddenly I was no longer going to school with kids in my neighborhood, and that suddenly my classmates were not very similar to me, because we were not only black in a very white school, but we were also very working class. So yeah, I was bused, and my parents made the decision without ever telling us why, because they thought it would give us better education opportunities. What I say briefly is, it was difficult. It was difficult to be one of 5 black kids in a school. It was difficult to watch all of your classmates walk home from school and hang around after school, and you have to get on a bus at the end of the day and go home to a community that was yours. But also that I know for a fact that I would not have received the education I received had I not done that. I got access to the best public education that our school had, and I have studied the statistics of my school district, and I know what my education would have been like had I had to stay in my neighborhood schools. With that said, I don't think you should have to leave your neighborhood schools to get a good education. Lord knows I would have preferred to have been in my neighborhood. But unfortunately, the history of our country makes that often impossible for many kids.
So as I alluded to before, desegregation, school desegregation, and integration are not really the most fashionable topics, especially in the last 10 years or so. And I wonder if you can share, either a reasoning or a moment when you realized that you needed to write about these topics.
So I think this is in the brochure. I got into journalism in high school, and my high school was about 20% black. Almost all of us were bused, and I was taking teaching a Black Studies class, and I was complaining to my newspaper professor, or not my newspaper, and it wasn't a professor, my Black Studies teacher, that our high school newspaper never wrote about kids like us. And he basically told me, if you don't like it, join the paper or don't come in my classroom complaining about it anymore. So I did, and I started telling our stories. I won my first journalism award from the Iowa, the High School Press Association, and I was kind of hooked in being able to tell our stories to give us a voice. So that's when I knew I wanted to be a journalist to write specifically about issues of race. But the issue of segregation, my very first job out of grad school was in Durham, North Carolina, and I was an education reporter. And that district was, at the time, 67% Black, heavily segregated. There were majority white schools, and then there were majority Black schools. And the majority Black schools were almost always 90 to 100% Black, and all of them were poor. And so I couldn't cover that district without writing about segregation and the impacts of segregation. And I quickly saw, that was about 2003. So right when No Child Left Behind is being implemented, and there's this promise that we're going to make these separate schools equal by testing the hell out of them. And we're going to punish these schools, and if they're not doing right, we're going to fire staff, we're going to change leadership. And it was this constant reform that I was seeing happening in these schools, and none of it was working. They'd say, oh, the high school's too big, so we're going to create 4 small high schools, and that's going to fix it. Or we'll create a middle college, and that's going to fix it. Or we're going to get rid of the principal every 2 years, and that's going to fix it. And it's not surprising to you all, but it didn't work. And so that's when I began to really look into what does actually work. I didn't know the story was in my own life at the time, but that was the answer.
And it all started to come together.
I don't even think I answered your question. So, just quickly. So that was when I first started writing about it. And then I did a bunch of other things. And then a couple years ago, I really wanted to, I feel like the way that we write about race is we either, as journalists, chase the racist of the week, who said something verifiably racist, or we just write about racial disparities as if they somehow just come from the sky and no one's responsible and we don't know how they got there. And I decided that I wanted to get to the root of it. And I wanted to show that none of this is accidental. And the 2 places that I started was housing and then, of course, schools. And when I spent about 2 years ago, I spent about 1.5 years writing Segregation Now, which was about school resegregation in the South. And I had these moments of sheer panic, of spending like a year on something that I was sure no one was going to read and no one was going to care about, because no one was talking about segregation. You guys were. But as you know, most of America was a done deal, whether you were Democrat or Republican, conservative or progressive, segregation was a dead issue. And I panicked about it. But I also felt like I'm not going to allow us to be comfortable with what we're doing to children and communities, even if no one's going to read it, nobody's going to care. It's not my job it's not my job to ignore it.
I recognize that sentiment. People read your stuff, though. So now we're going to listen to the first clip, and this is from Nikole's piece from This American Life. Andrew,
I stumbled on this place by accident.
Oh, wait, can you stop? I'm sorry, that was my bad. Can you just tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear here?
Yes, and I'll keep my answers shorter from now on. As you can tell, I'm a little passionate about the subject. So this clip is basically the reason why I ended up doing This American Life. Ferguson was on fire. There were like all of these, everyone was wondering like what the hell was happening down there. And of course, I'm thinking about schools because I'd been writing about school segregation for the last 1.5 years. But it's this clip, which is Michael Brown's mother. She's literally like standing in front of the police tape, unable to get to her child who is dead on this concrete. And this is what she's talking about. And this is what made me say, I have to go down there and tell the story.
Watching the coverage of Michael Brown almost a year ago, like the rest of America, there was one moment that I could not get out of my head. It's news footage of his mother, Leslie McSpadden, right after he was killed.
This was wrong, and that was cold-hearted. It was. No justice. Cold-hearted.
She's standing in a crowd of onlookers, a few feet from where her son was shot down, where he would lie face down on the concrete for 4 hours, dead. And this is what she says.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate? You know how many black men graduate? Not many.
I watched this over and over. A police officer has just killed her oldest child. It has to be the worst moment of her life. But of all the ways she could have expressed her grief and outrage, this is what was on her mind. School. Getting her son through school. Michael Brown became a national symbol of the police violence against black youth. But when I looked into his education, I realized he's also a symbol of something else, something much more common. Most black kids will not be shot by the police, but many of them will go to a school like Michael Brown's. It took me all of 5 minutes on the internet to find out that the school district he attended is almost completely black, almost completely poor, and failing badly. The district is called Normandy. It's made up of one high school, the one that Michael Brown attended, a middle school, and 5 elementary schools. It's in a town also called Normandy that borders on Ferguson. Each year, the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education puts out a report that shows how each of its 520 school districts is doing. It's a numeric snapshot of the type of education students are receiving. Districts get points for academic achievement, for how many students graduate, for how well they're prepared for college. In 2014, Michael Brown's senior year, here's how the Normandy School District was performing. Points for academic achievement in English, 0. Math, 0. Social studies, 0. Science, 0. Points for college placement, 0. It seems impossible, but in 11 of 13 measures, the district didn't earn a single point. 10 out of 140 points. That was its score. It's like how they say you get points on the SAT just for writing your name. It's like they got 10 points just for existing. Normandy is the worst district in the state of Missouri. Maybe Michael Brown's mom knew these scores. Or maybe she just knew her son's school didn't graduate about half of its black boys. I don't know. I reached out to her several times and she didn't want to talk. But in the Normandy district, mothers who are worried about the quality of the schools aren't hard to find.
So one of the things I love about your work, and I think this next clip that we're going to play portrays that really well, is that you portray people oftentimes in really challenging circumstances in really complex ways. People are never just a sum of the challenges that they face. And within just a couple of sentences, I think, at least me and other people I know, are already really rooting for the people that you're writing about. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about maybe 1 or 2 people who you've met during your reporting who've had an influence on you and maybe have shaped your thinking or taught you something.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question. It's a hard question because I still get emotional hearing that clip of Michael Brown's mom. And there's so many. I'm the type of reporter, I carry my stories with me, and so I don't forget a lot of the characters, a lot of the people who allow me to tell their stories. But one that really sticks out is a young lady named Delisha, who I wrote about last year in Segregation Now. And Delisha, the first time I met her, I knew she was going to be the one that I was going to tell the story through, because she is the girl that we tell black and brown students, if you do these things, then you will be able to partake in the American dream. The doors will open for you if you do all of these things. And she did them all. She was the class president. She was on the mayor's youth council. She took every tough course that our high school had to offer. She was a leader. She was very sweet. She was like the kind of girl who was like popular and smart and not a mean girl, and had done everything that we told her that she could do. But she spent 13 years in segregated, failing schools. She had no idea what it was like to ever have a classmate who wasn't just like her. And when it was time for her to apply for college, she couldn't score higher than a 16 on her ACT, and she was devastated. And while all these other kids were getting mailing after mailing from colleges that were trying to recruit them, she was getting nothing. She was getting something from the Army. And you just realize, and I followed her for several months when she goes from this hope of college will be her first integrated experience, and she'll finally get to see literally if white people have movie theaters in their homes, because she did not know what it was like to be in a white person's home. She just thought they were much richer than her. And by the end of the story, after I followed her several months, she has one college that's maybe going to let her in, and it's a historically black college, which is great, But once again, she was still not going to have the integrated experience that she wanted. And so I think about her all the time, because in some ways it's unfair to write the story through her, because every kid's not going to be that kid. But I'm like, if that kid who's done everything doesn't get an equal chance, what does that say for everyone else who is just the average kid trying to make it? So I think, I actually did a reading about Delucia last night in New York, and I said she's like my conscience. Like, when I'm writing stories, she's the one that I think about, because we promised these kids, we've promised them more than that, and we're kind of okay with them not getting it.
Right.
Good people are okay with them not getting it.
Exactly. So we're going to play the next clip. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what we're going to hear here. We're still in Normandy.
So this clip is of the two main characters in this story, which is Nedra Martin, who's a mom in Normandy, and her daughter, Maria. And Maria is also a great student who has been in these Normandy schools in a district that had been on probation for 15 years and finally was unaccredited. She's trying to find a way to get her kid out of this district, but this is the only place she can afford to live. And as you know, other public schools do not welcome kids from outside of their borders.
Over the last couple of months, I've spent a lot of time with one of them, a Normandy mother named Nedra Martin. Nedra decided she had to get Maria out of Normandy. She made a list of nearby school districts and private schools. Then she turned her car into a mobile situation room. The mission? Get Maria into a better school.
Obviously, when I'm at work, these offices are open. When I get off, they're closed. So what I would do is take later lunches on my job, go to my car, sit in my car after I've written down telephone numbers and names the night before, and I would spend my whole lunch hour calling these offices.
The nearby districts told Nedra they would enroll Maria, but since she lived outside of their boundaries, Nedra would have to pay tuition, upwards of $15,000 a year. She couldn't afford that.
If I would be required to pay for her to get a public education, then I might as well try to send her to a private school.
She checked into those, but even with financial aid, she couldn't afford private school either.
I was at a point of desperation. I was literally desperate to just pull my daughter out of a district that I felt failed me and my children. I was at a point of desperation. We had to do better.
In most of the thousands of poor, segregated schools in America, that would be it. Your zip code is the anchor that traps you. That would have been it for Nedra, too, if it weren't for what happened next.
New tonight, a major blow to a school district in the metro area. The Missouri State Board of Education is pulling accreditation from the Normandy School District.
In January of 2013, just a few months after that breakfast, Normandy lost its accreditation from the state. No one really explained why they'd lost it after all this time. Remember, they'd been on probation for 15 years. The school stayed open, but this rare event triggered a little-known Missouri law called the transfer law. The transfer law gives students in unaccredited districts the right to transfer to a nearby accredited one for free. Any student in Normandy was now allowed out.
I was elated. I was just so excited, like God had truly answered my prayers, because that sense of desperation, it was a burden. It was honestly a weight lifted off my shoulders.
She told me, and then I was like, what does that mean? And then she was like, that means you get to go to a different school district. I was like, what? Say that again? Really? I was so happy.
I was just excited. I think Maria and I got together and just did a swing dance of some kind.
Do you remember that conversation?
We were so happy.
So, Nikole, when you send a story like this or any of the other wonderful, human, provocative, moving stories that you've done out into the world, what is your highest aspiration for your work? Like, what do you hope will happen? I know it's probably different for everyone. But.
Yeah. So I never can figure out if I'm a pessimist or a realist. But I expect very little, actually. I think that Americans are actually quite comfortable with the inequality. I think that if you look at the narratives around this, we think that these kids deserve it because their parents didn't work hard enough. So, I hear all the time, I worked hard so my kid could be in this good public school and their parents should have worked hard. Why should they get something when they didn't work for it? So I don't expect big things to happen. The most that can hope is that someone will feel a little guilty for a minute and think differently, but these are such intractable issues, and we didn't try very hard to undo them. I don't think we're trying very hard now. And I live in New York City, very liberal progressive mayor. We have a very progressive president, and no one's talking about integration. So, yeah, I think I do it because I don't believe, it's like, I try to afflict the comfortable. I don't believe that we should just ignore it because people aren't going to do anything, but I don't expect a lot to happen. I guess the most I can expect is that the people whose stories I tell feel like they have some voice and power for maybe the first time in these situations. Yeah. Sorry, I'm never hopeful. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I think that's an answer I think we all need to hear. It's your humility, I guess. So we're going to hear two more clips. The first one is really short, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what we're going to hear. What we're going to hear now.
So this accidental integration plan meant that Normandy had to pick a school district where it would provide transportation to, and it picks a school district that's 30 miles away. It's very white, actually in another county. It's a community that was settled by people who wanted to avoid being around people that they consider to be inner city. So they obviously were not happy that suddenly, up to 4,000 kids could come into their district and they couldn't stop them. So they have a town hall, and Nidra decides to go because this is where her daughter's going to be going to school, and she decides to take her daughter. And she thinks about whether she should take her or not, but she was like, she needs to know what she's getting into. So she takes her daughter, and this is that town hall.
And before we play the clip, I should say that this is a very truncated version of a very long piece and a long scene in the auditorium, and I stress that everybody should listen to it, even though it's rather chilling. And then the longer clip is of Nidra and Mom's mom.
We were so happy.
They're still happy then.
A mother named Besarami approaches the microphone.
This is what I want to know from you. In 1 month, I send my 3 small children to you, and I want to know, is there going to be metal detectors?
I knew that there would be negative opinions, but not that negative.
I got a concern about, and I'm not sure
I didn't think it would be like that.
Maria was watching it all on the monitors in an overflow room. At a certain point, she grabbed her mom's hand and told her she wanted to speak at the mic.
Because I felt that I needed to represent, what if your kid was in Normandy High School and they were just offered this opportunity, and other parents are saying, we don't want you here. How are you going to feel? Your kid's going to cry because parents are saying how awful your kid is when really they're being put in a box, because they're not like that. We're just stuck there because we're not open to the opportunities. And now we're open to them, and now you want to be all mean, talking about you're afraid of how big the class is going to be, the violence in the schools, and so.
That's what she planned to say.
So I had to walk out, go to the big gym, and we were standing by the door, Me and my mom were walking towards the aisle, and I had hesitated. I didn't even get halfway to the microphone because of what the parents were saying. I stopped the second to last row of chairs because I did not want to say anything anymore. And then this lady, I don't remember who she was like, "I'll hold your hand," because I kind of started getting a little teary-eyed, but I couldn't do it.
Nidra saw her daughter freeze. She says she thought about Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white elementary school in the South. She's the little girl guarded by U.S. Marshals in the famous Norman Rockwell painting called The Problem We All Live With.
We're still dealing with that today. I kept telling myself, as if I was talking to those parents who were not embracing this decision, my child may be the doctor that saves your life one day. My child may be the lawyer that defends your child one day. How dare you?
See some of you crying, that's good, right? So listening to these clips is really painful, I'm sure even for you, the 80th time around. But and it would be understandable, I think, to conclude for someone listening to that is, my God, let's not even do this anymore, let's not even try it. But I assume that's not the fatalist message you hope that people take away. I mean, what do you hope people take away from this piece, which is a very multi-layered, complicated piece of reporting, and then your work in general?
We have to try, obviously. You know, that's why everyone is gathered here. That's why I do what I do. It's because these are children. These are our fellow Americans, and we're wasting a lot of talent. We're squandering the dreams of a lot of people, and so we have to try. And I can tell you, like, it's personal for me because I was a child that somebody would not have wanted in school. I was a child that someone thought because my dad drove a bus and we lived in the wrong part of town didn't deserve an education. And you can look at what I've been able to achieve and you realize for so many other kids who don't have a way out, they're not achieving because they can't. So we have to try, and even though I say don't know if I'm pessimistic or realistic, I also realize that we're not where we once were in this country, that progress, I don't know if the arc of the universe bends towards justice. It kind of seems like it sometimes bends back, but we have to keep trying because things can get better, and we owe it to our children. I have a 5-year-old in a school that is now actually undergoing an integration battle. So I know how important it is. And the difference is, like, I have choice, and so many of us in this room, we have choice. If our public schools aren't good, despite our morals and our beliefs, we can pull our kids out of those schools and make a way for our kid. But for so many people, they don't have a choice. And if we're not speaking for them, if we're not telling their stories, I think we should be ashamed.
So we're going to just play this one last clip, which is sort of, we've done the beginning, middle, and end here. And then I'd like to invite the audience into the conversation and ask questions.
While Normandy is falling apart, over at Francis Howell, none of the things the parents were worried about came true. No one got stabbed, test scores did not drop at all, and at least so far, the influx of black students hasn't caused white parents to flee. Maria's thriving. Where the transfer law forced integration, it's working. The educational devastation in Normandy has finally gotten the attention of the state's most powerful people, including state legislators and the governor. The law says they can't keep the Normandy kids in schools that aren't accredited, so they're proposing charter schools and virtual school programs that students would attend. They're sending in teacher coaches from wealthier districts. The idea is, try anything they can to keep Normandy students inside the district. This is how far they will go to avoid that one thing that already seems to be working: integration.